Hello and welcome to Inside the Americas with me, Thomas Waterhouse. Here's what's coming up for you in the show. America remembers one of its greats. Marches and church services are held in memory of the civil rights activist Martin Luther King on the 50th anniversary of his assassination. The world of Argentinian football is rocked by claims of sexual abuse. One of the capital's biggest clubs is at the centre of a scandal involving junior players that dates back as far as 2004. And we take you to the melting landscapes of Antarctica, where one group of Chilean scientists are tracking climate change and its effects on glaciers there. We begin this edition with our number of the week, which this week is 50. That's the number of years that have gone by since the black rights activist Martin Luther King was fatally shot on the balcony of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee. As news of that assassination spread, African Americans poured onto the streets in rage. Our correspondents have been to speak to some of those who remember the nights of unrest, clashes and looting that took place in Washington, D.C.
Virginia Ali has seen how times have changed on U Street since 1968. She is the 84-year-old owner of Ben's Chili Bowl, a Washington institution that survived the riots.
When Dr. King was shot that night, and everybody was in tears and crying and very, very sad, then that sadness kind of turned into frustration, and the frustration into anger, and the uprising started. When the riots happened, you would have seen all of this stuff being broken down, broken into, and being robbed, and being just burning. It was just a sad time, a very sad time. Japan, nice. I love your food.
Ben's Chili Bowl has become much more than just a fast food joint. It was the only restaurant that was allowed to stay open during 3 nights of rioting.
And this provided a place for first responders, police officers, city officials, activists, everybody looking for a comfortable, a safe place and some comfort food and some coffee. This was the place.
Barack Obama and none other than Martin Luther King Jr. are among those who graced the booths here. Virginia Ali's restaurant is a slice of history.
Okay.
U Street was once known as the Black Broadway of Washington, D.C. But after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and the riots in 1968, decades of neglect followed. Recently, though, there has been urban renewal. Because of increasing rent prices, though, many African Americans had to leave this area. They are still proud, though, of what this part of the U.S. Capitol represents. Clenny Murphy grew up here and saw the riots up close. He still comes to Washington's now gentrified 14th Street to go to church every Sunday.
It was a riot zone. The term riot is really true. The demographics changed and everything. The church has shrank now to less than 300 members. Now, that's their acolyte.
Many of the churchgoers are of Clenny's age, of Martin Luther King Jr.'s generation. Their numbers are dwindling.
I think he would be highly disappointed, extremely disappointed, to have everything pretty much put in reverse.
Washington's 14th Street is now booming. A predominantly white and rich crowd now saunters down the blocks that were burning 50 years ago.
Well, let's stay with the US now for our image of the week, which comes from the so-called Sooner state of Oklahoma. But judging by this picture of protesters there, they want to rename it the State of Despair. Over 1,000 teachers have staged a walkout, prompting several school closures, with this huge demonstration taking place outside the state capitol building in Oklahoma City. That teacher rebellion over pay and cuts has also spread to other states. Last week, most Republicans broke with the party line and endorsed hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes to give teachers a pay rise of between 15 and 18%. Now, it's often been referred to in the past as the beautiful game, but the sport of football has turned ugly in Argentina. The club River Plate is among several to be caught up in allegations that its junior players were sexually abused. A lawyer for the charity Help for Rape Victims says a former doctor had informed them that some boys had been abused between 2004 and 2011. Shona Bhattacharya has more.
A snowballing scandal. Argentina's River Plate club is reeling from allegations of sexual abuse. The club says it'll cooperate with authorities despite days earlier firing the club doctor who drew attention to the allegations. Argentinians are stunned, and many refuse to believe the claims.
All this is a lie. River's a club where the family can come, where everyone can come.
In general, we're used to these problems of paedophilia being tied to the church, and now we realize that it actually goes beyond that.
River Plate is one of the two biggest sports clubs in Buenos Aires and has 16 active teams, including in football and volleyball, where the abuse is alleged to have taken place. At least 3 young players say they were taken advantage of between 2004 and 2011. The River Plate scandal comes after other reports of sex abuse at Independiente, one of Argentina's most successful football teams.
This case is shocking. When we heard about the story of what happened in Independiente, we didn't think other clubs could be affected. Not because we were ignorant, but because they seemed like very serious clubs, very responsible.
In March, a psychologist at Independiente claimed 2 players aged 15 and 16 told her they and others were forced into prostitution by another player. A Buenos Aires prosecutor has opened an investigation, and 6 people have been arrested so far. It remains unclear whether the abuse at the 2 clubs was connected. Both River Plate and Independiente house youths from poor, rural areas hoping to turn their passion for sports into a career and include a football academy and an education center.
And we're staying with South America to end the bulletin on a rather cold note. Scientists from Chile have been busy looking at climate change in Antarctica. They've been studying how rising temperatures and sea levels there have impacted glaciers, whilst putting forward solutions to help generations in the future who look set to be affected by that melting ice.
This white winter wonderland is in danger. The rocks seen under the snow are new to Antarctica's landscape. 10 years ago, they were still completely hidden under a thick layer of ice. That was before global warming interceded and the glacier began to melt.
I've been coming here for the past 15 years, and even during that kind of timescale, you can see the changes that global warming brings about. You can see rocks on the Collins glaciers or the Bellingshausen Dome that you couldn't see 5 or 10 years ago, and that is direct proof of the shrinking of the glacier and the loss of mass.
At this Chilean scientific base, tens of scientists measure the effects of global warming on the local flora and fauna. Here, the increasing temperature of the water has provoked a growth in the number of green algae, and scientists study how crustaceans adapt their behavior accordingly.
Even though they're so small, the algae, both macro and micro, are very important in keeping the balance of the food chain, as they provide nutrition to the rest of the ecosystem. We know that the number of species in an ecosystem is really important for it to remain healthy.
The investigation may also help other regions on the planet to prepare for the consequences of global warming. With these small greenhouses, Marisol Pizarro studies how Antarctica's plants respond to an artificial temperature increase of 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Her report shows that the moss resists well to the new conditions, an advantage which, thanks to DNA manipulation, may serve other vegetation in the future.
Nosotros podemos transferir un gen que esté relacionado con la tolerancia a la desecación.
We can transfer a gene related to drought tolerance to a common plant, like lettuce or rice, and that plant will have the ability to tolerate droughts and won't be as affected by adverse conditions when there is less water in its environment.
Por las condiciones adversas cuando hay una disminución del agua ambiental.
The planet's temperature has already increased by 1 degree, and Antarctica is one of the world's regions that is warming up most rapidly. It is therefore a race against time for these scientists from across the world who work on this icy cold continent.
That brings us to the end of this week's edition of Inside the Americas. Do stay with us here on France 24. There's more world news coming up.
Here in Paris, we are the early birds.
You mean the nighttime owls? We're up at 2 a.m, ready to be on air at 6.
But it is the breakfast slot here in Europe, across Africa or the Middle East.
But what time of day is it where you are?
In India, it would be the morning or lunchtime.
In the Far East, it's already the afternoon.
Meanwhile, across in Australia, it's already the early evening.
And on the west coast of the US, it's already late at night.
But wherever you are and at whatever time, we're bringing you the latest news, business updates, press reviews and analysis.
Making sure you're the best informed you can be, whatever time of day.
Live from Paris, new format on France 24 and France24.com.